No one truly understands what lies behind the blank stare of Wang Yibo, a young actor with a cold aura that often makes him difficult to read. He is known to be quiet, rarely speaking unless asked, and always maintaining an emotional distance even with people he has worked with for a long time. However, there is one exception that is slowly changing the way Yibo views the world. Someone who arrives with a warm smile, a gaze full of sincerity, and a gentle personality that is so different from his own. That person is Xiao Zhan. No one expected that from the moment they were paired together in a project that would later change their careers, Yibo began to realize something different in himself, something he had kept hidden for years. From the first day of filming, Xiao Zhan arrived with a bright smile that seemed to soften the room. Yibo glanced at him, trying to keep his expression neutral, but there was something in the way Xiao Zhan greeted him that made his heart flutter a little. He didn't understand that feeling at first, thinking it was just admiration for a more experienced senior. However, as time went by, that gaze grew into something more complicated. Every time Xiao Zhan laughed until his eyes formed crescent moons, Yibo would turn his head quietly. Every time Xiao Zhan practiced difficult scenes until he was exhausted, Yibo wanted to approach him and offer him a drink or just tell him to take a break, even though what came out of his mouth were only short, flat words. These small actions were wrapped in Yibo's characteristic cold demeanor, but the attention was real, sincere, and slowly became part of his routine. Many of the crew thought Yibo was just maintaining professionalism. They never realized that behind that silence, there was an inner world that he never revealed to anyone. He always arrived early when he knew he and Xiao Zhan would be filming a scene together, as if his body moved without being commanded. He felt more alert every time Xiao Zhan looked tired, and even though he wasn't good at showing his concern openly, Yibo would make sure that the person he secretly cared about was always okay. In every scene that required physical closeness, Yibo tried to maintain his professionalism, but on the other hand, he also felt something he couldn't control, a warm feeling that made him want to prolong the moment, even if only for another second. Even when the camera stopped rolling, he still felt the subtle echo of that closeness in his chest. However, feelings like that are complicated for someone like him. Yibo grew up as a man who was taught to build walls, so he wouldn't get hurt easily. He knows that the entertainment world is not always friendly, and he knows that feelings that are too visible can be a weakness. That's why he chooses to remain silent, choosing to keep everything in a hidden space that even he avoids opening. But Xiao Zhan always had a way of breaking through that wall, without him realizing it. With his simple manner, attentive attitude, and warm gaze, Xiao Zhan was the only person who could make Yibo let his guard down, even if only for a moment. There was one moment that Yibo always remembered, a small incident that wasn't really important to anyone else, but it reinforced the feelings he had been ignoring all this time. That day, they were filming an emotional scene. After a long take, Xiao Zhan rested his head on Yibo's shoulder and chuckled softly. "I'm tired," he said lightly. Yibo didn't move, his body stiffening instantly, but his heart seemed to beat faster than usual. He pretended not to care, just snorting softly, but in that moment, he knew there was something he could no longer resist. He felt comfortable, too comfortable. And that kind of comfort was dangerous for someone who was used to keeping his distance. Since then, Yibo's feelings grew like a small seed that was allowed to live quietly inside him. He began to notice the little things. The way Xiao Zhan tied his hair when getting ready, his little habit of biting his lip when nervous, or how he always calmed the situation with gentle words even when he himself was stressed. Yibo found himself smiling, even if only slightly, every time he remembered those things. And when he saw Xiao Zhan smiling at other people on set, there was a slight tingling sensation in his chest. It wasn't jealousy. At least he didn't want to admit it. But there was a desire to be the one who made Xiao Zhan smile the most. But the deeper that feeling grew, the more Yibo felt he had to guard it. The outside world was too noisy, too full of assumptions and expectations. He knew that even the smallest relationship could be blown out of proportion by the public. He chose to remain silent, keeping everything tightly under wraps, even covering it up with a cold attitude that made people think he didn't care. But secretly, behind the scenes, he was always near Xiao Zhan, even if it wasn't very obvious. He was the first to notice when Xiao Zhan looked stressed, and without words, he would give Xiao Zhan space to breathe. He was the one who would stand a little closer when many cameras were pointed at them, whether as a form of protection or simply because he felt calmer when he was near that person. Years passed, and those feelings did not disappear. Instead, they took root, growing to become a part of him. It was not explosive love, nor was it an obsessive feeling that bound him. It was a calm, mature, and meaningful feeling, like the faint light of a candle that never goes out even when buffeted by the wind. Yibo realized that he didn't need grand acknowledgments or dramatic moments. He just wanted Xiao Zhan to be happy, even if that happiness didn't involve him. It was a cliché, but he understood it more deeply than anyone else. Behind it all, Xiao Zhan seemed to always know that there was something different about Yibo when they were together. He never forced him to talk, never demanded anything, just provided a presence that felt safe. It was that presence that kept Yibo going, made him feel seen without having to reveal his whole self. And in their silence, there was a connection that didn't even need words. No one knew if the feelings Yibo had kept for years would ever be revealed. No one knew whether Xiao Zhan felt the same way or simply considered it a closeness between co-workers. But in this story, those feelings remained, becoming a tender secret that Yibo kept in silence. Feelings that grew without him asking, persisted without him realizing, and took root without him being able to erase them. Perhaps one day, those feelings will find a way to be spoken. Perhaps not. But for now, let those feelings remain the most beautiful and most hidden part of Wang Yibo's life. Feelings he has kept for years, for one person only, Xiao Zhan.